Started in just a moment. We're just working on some issues with the live stream, get that ready, so just bear with us for a moment. But thank you all for coming, and if you haven't silenced your phones, now would be a great time to do so. We will get started very shortly. Hey, Ted. I don't. But Jared, who just stepped out, probably would. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not connected. Yeah, we're good to go? Okay, very good. Good morning then, and thank you all very much for coming. Really appreciate this terrific turnout on a late August day. I'm Sam Thernstrom. I'm the president of the Energy Innovation Reform Project, and we're here to celebrate the release of How America Can Achieve Nuclear Energy Dominance, a report that we produced in cooperation with our partners at the Center for the National Interest. And I know my colleague Paul Saunders is very sorry he couldn't be here with us today, but he is following up on a prior family commitment, and I trust he's much happier where he is right now. I believe he's cruising in Alaska. So, but thank you all for coming, and I do want to acknowledge Paul's very significant contributions to this effort. He really did heavy lifting. So appreciate everyone's participation. Ordinarily, we might have held off on releasing this report until September, but we felt it was really important to move forward with this conversation right away, because whether you're a fan or a critic, I think it's very clear that President Trump's executive orders on nuclear energy that were issued in June have really supercharged this conversation. It seems like all the pent-up momentum towards nuclear energy that I've seen over my entire 20-plus years in this town is suddenly unleashed and is moving forward. And so, to borrow a phrase, thank you for your attention to this matter. Despite that strong enthusiasm for the subject, I would also note that we're not just here for happy talk this morning. That would be boring and dishonest. This is a very challenging field, and our report was developed, in fact, specifically to address those challenges. And today, I hope we'll dig into some of those thornier questions. I'm going to make just a few very quick comments here, 3, 4, 5 minutes to orient us, and then I will turn things over to our distinguished panel. We have 3 speakers from our working group. They'll each offer comments, and then all of you will have a chance to ask questions, okay? So as I say, this is a uniquely promising moment for nuclear energy in the US, and yet we have to be realistic about, we've all heard the term nuclear renaissance for many years, and it didn't happen in the past. And so, we have to be realistic about, we have much more willpower, I think, on this effort than we have had in the past. The question is willpower enough? Is there a way to move forward on these things? And the way is challenging and complex, and the challenges are certainly multidimensional. We need to be able to license and build reactors in the US and be able to export them globally. These are 2 different markets. Our strategies for them are interconnected and very synergistic, but each has its own particular challenges, and we need to be able to do both. That's not an easy thing. Obviously, I think everyone here appreciates that deployment of new nuclear reactors in the US to date has been quite limited, despite, as I've said, strong enthusiasm for 20 years to do that. Hats off to our friends at Southern who did complete the Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors. But it's important to appreciate that regulatory reform and other policy support can make it easier to build nuclear, but energy market dynamics are very complex, and utilities are understandably cautious about such large investments. And so even with strong policy support, there are questions about whether there will be enough demand for nuclear given the challenges of commercializing these technologies. And we think that strong policy support is critical to addressing that. I also think that the complexities of the regulatory reform challenges need to be appreciated. It's very easy to look at the kind of bottleneck of the NRC and say, oh, well, that's ridiculous. We've got to clear all that away and solve these problems. But again, solutions are not as simple as they may appear. We have tried to offer some very specific suggestions in this report for actionable ways to be constructive in this space, but it's also worth acknowledging that there are serious longtime observers in this space who would argue that trying to invent a new regulatory path is just going to slow you down in the end, and that it's better to pursue the devil that you know well than to try to take a new path and find new unanticipated obstacles down the road. So knowing which reforms to pursue is going to be very important in the coming months, and we think there's been some good steps forward, but we also think we need to keep an eye on the ball. And then obviously internationally, this is a very complex and competitive market. Our competitors, Russia, China, and so forth, have very strong positions in those markets, and they certainly don't intend to let us get into them easily. And many of our friends out there in the world also strong roles in this market. So I don't think we can undervalue the degree of difficulty here. Civilian nuclear energy was obviously pioneered in the United States, but we've surrendered our leadership in the field, and we need to work very hard to recover it. So that's just a partial list of the challenges, but I'm sure everyone here also appreciates the potential benefits of succeeding in this effort are enormous. And so we've got a lot of reason to dig in now and see if we can successfully achieve at least some fraction of the strong ambitions that this administration has expressed for nuclear dominance. So that's why we convened the Working Group on U.S. Nuclear Energy Dominance earlier this year to recommend policies that can help achieve the administration's vision. This is a unique group, 19 members reflecting wide-ranging expertise in different facets of the field. I should emphasize that although the report was designed to recommend policies for the current administration and congressional majority to consider, the working group membership is bipartisan, including some of our speakers today. And the report was definitely written to be factual and bipartisan in tone. It's not a political document. I hope people will see it on those terms. I would also want to emphasize, as it states in the report, that the 19 members who participated did so as individuals. Their institutional affiliations are given for purposes of identification, but you shouldn't assume that their organizations are necessarily endorsing every comma in the report. I would also emphasize, I don't expect that everyone has necessarily had a chance to see the report. The report is not just high-level hand-waving. It is more than 30, I think it's 33 specific recommendations for action, which are organized under 7 key topic areas: prioritizing nuclear energy within the administration, boosting domestic deployment, promoting exports, strengthening the fuel cycle, rebuilding the manufacturing and supply chain, reforming the NRC, and strengthening America's nuclear workforce. So those are the kind of key areas that we think there are important opportunities for reform and new policies that can be supportive. So that was just a few words to kind of get us rolling, give us a little bit of a feel for what's in the report. We have, as I said, we have 3 panelists here. I'll give a couple very brief introduction to the 3 of them in the order in which they're going to speak, and then I'll turn it over. Immediately to my right, your left, is Todd Abrajano, who is president and CEO of the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council, who chaired our working group. He also held senior positions at the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency in the first Trump administration. Sitting next to him, although he'll speak last, is Bradley Williams, senior policy advisor and lead for energy policy and strategic analysis at the Idaho National Lab. Brad's doing really important work in this administration, and we really look forward to hearing his comments. And on the end is John Kotek, Senior Vice President for Policy Development and Public Affairs at NEI, and probably well known to many of you. And John will offer his perspectives and the utility industry's perspectives on these questions. So as I said, we'll have about 10 minutes or so of comments from each of them, and then we'll take questions.
Great, thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. I want to start off first by saying thanks to Sam, as well as Paul Saunders, for giving me the opportunity to participate and chair this working group. We were able to put a great group of people together, and so thanks to Brad and John as well and the rest of the group that put a lot of time and effort into developing this report. I am not going to I'm not going to agree with Sam, and I'm going to hope that most of you in this room have already read the report. So I'm going to just dive sort of right into the policy recommendations that we put forward in the report, and I'm going to touch on sort of the first 3 sets of policy recommendations. And so, starting with the first, making nuclear energy dominance a national priority. The very first policy bullet point we put in here was have the White House Office of Management and Budget, the White House Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, and all relevant departments and agencies place the highest priority on ensuring adequate financial resources for full implementation of the President's executive orders on nuclear energy. So on May 23rd, the President obviously put forward 4 executive orders focused on this industry. And I think overwhelmingly the industry supports all of those orders, and we're very happy to see this president do that. From my experience in the first Trump administration, working directly on nuclear issues at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, I know the president supported nuclear energy and the nuclear industry here in the United States overall during that first administration. But in this current administration, I think he's really taken the nuclear energy ball and run with it. And to see him do what he did with those executive orders was great. So now we have to figure out, okay, how are we actually going to implement these executive orders? How is this administration going to do that? How is the Hill going to cooperate with this administration to make sure that we can do what's been asked for in those executive orders? And so, I'm pleased to have heard as of a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure many of you in this room understand that the Office of Management Budget is currently overseeing almost all expenditures coming out of this administration. And so, immediately when Trump 2 took office, there was a pause on financial assistance programs, and there was, at my former agency, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, a continued pause on both nuclear programs and LNG programs. And so, in conversations over the last couple of weeks with the current acting director of USTDA, those restrictions have been lifted, which is great news. But we need to make sure that all interagency partners in this administration are able to move forward and be helpful in implementing these executive orders. The president specifically called out my former agency, USTDA, XM, the Development Finance Corporation. All of those sort of export promotion agencies are going to be important for exporting this technology. And so not only for what we need to do here in the United States, but what we need to do overseas. It's exceptionally important that we've got agreement across this administration and with nuclear energy advocates on the Hill to really move the industry forward. Let me first turn to the next sort of set of bullets, which is boosting domestic deployment. Based on what I just said, there's a couple here I want to talk about. The first being providing risk insurance or some other policy, similar policy support to assist project developers with first-of-a-kind or other early commercial reactors. This is a really important piece of the puzzle, I think, and the working group obviously concurred because it's in the report. When I took this job at the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council, I immediately began having conversations with the Biden administration about this very point. Unfortunately, that administration did not want to discuss this particular policy, which was, I think it hindered our ability to get out and really move fast to try to get reactors built. And so I've continued those conversations with the Trump administration, and I'm happy to report that they are at least willing to talk about risk insurance as we move forward. And from my point of view, and others on the panel can talk about this as well, but from my point of view, this isn't something that the United States government has to fully support 100%. I think that there are a lot of stakeholders that come to the table in terms of the project developers, in terms of EPC contractors that all have a stake in the game here. And I think it's important that all of them work together to try to figure out how we can put together some risk insurance that is supported by all of those stakeholders so that we can really move forward. I think from a financial perspective, we've seen big banks on Wall Street really sort of start to lean in much more over the last 12 months with respect to funding the nuclear industry and newer projects that could potentially come online. But I think in order to really move that money from those banks into the industry at a much more rapid pace, we have to look to figuring out how we can reduce that risk for those investors as much as possible. And so risk insurance is incredibly important as we continue to move forward. The second point I want to talk about under boosting domestic deployment is preserving existing funding for the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. The president, in his executive orders, said he would like to see 10 new large-scale light water reactors under construction by 2030. That's a very ambitious goal. And I think the only way that we're really going to see that happen is if the Loan Program Office has the funding that's necessary for the domestic industry to be able to start construction on those 10 new projects here in the United States. Moreover, I think it's exceptionally important for us to get those 10 projects off the ground as soon as possible, because that gives us an ability to, one, prove that we can continue to do what we did with units 3 and 4 at Plant Vogtle, which was build new AP1000s here in the United States. But moreover, it's important to show that we can now do it on time and on budget. And if we can do that, we will really see international export opportunities for the AP1000 really begin to take off. I continue to have good conversations with folks at the Department of Energy. I am convinced that the funding that the LPO has available and has had available will continue to be available, and I think a lot of that money will be redirected to the nuclear industry, but I think it's absolutely important for LPO to continue its ability to fund projects here in the nuclear space in the United States. Now I want to turn to international export markets a little bit in particular, and talk about really 3 bullet points under these policy recommendations. The first being direct the National Energy Dominance Council to coordinate nuclear energy export policies as proposed in the International Nuclear Energy Act of 2025. This is incredibly important. We need to have someone in the United States federal government whose job and sole job is to promote this industry internationally. If we don't, we are going to have our clocks cleaned by the Russians and the Chinese over the next several decades, and I don't think anybody in this room, or certainly on this panel or within this working group, wants to see that happen. The legislation is looking to place an assistant to the president in that role. That's something that I've advocated for a long time, and going back to my service in the first Trump administration, we advocated for that as well internally. Ultimately, we ended up setting up what we called a deals team that was led by one of the undersecretaries at the State Department and the undersecretary for international trade at the Commerce Department to try to move projects like large nuclear infrastructure projects forward at the international level. But we do need to have someone in the White House at a very high level, at that assistant to the president level, that can coordinate across the interagency. And I hope that the White House hears that, and I hope that they look to implement that as we move forward. Secondly, to reauthorize and expand the authorities of the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation to better support nuclear energy exports. From my perspective, where I sat in the first Trump administration leading the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, we worked in conjunction with XM and the DFC on a regular basis. XM Bank has, throughout the Biden administration, I think leaned forward much more than they had previously in terms of where they could invest in nuclear projects, and I was happy to see that. But look, they're up for reauthorization again during this current Trump administration, and I think there are certain tweaks that can be made to the authorities of both the XM Bank and the DFC in order to provide increased opportunities and increased funding for projects in the international space, and give our U.S. companies and U.S. technologies opportunities in those markets overseas where they may not have had them already, or may not have been able to effectively compete already. So that's very, very important. The third point I want to talk about in the international export market is reflects sort of things that need to be changed in the regulatory space. This bullet is to expand NRC cooperation with foreign regulators. This is something that's already been done and being done at the NRC, especially with Canada and the UK. But the NRC has, one, incredible expertise in the regulatory space, and two, is regarded as the gold standard for regulation across the world. And so as many of these countries that are looking to build new nuclear in their countries, whether they already have nuclear programs already, or if they are looking to build their first reactor and need to build up an in-house regulator there in the country, that's something that the NRC can certainly help those countries do, and I think it's very important that they continue to expand that cooperation with as many countries as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to John and look forward to questions later on the panel.
All right, thanks. Good morning, everyone. You're going to hear me echo several of the same themes that Todd touched on. first, I really want to thank Sam and Paul and Todd for your work in bringing this report forward. It's both timely and readable, which is rare for reports in this space, so I really like the accessibility and really the to the point nature of the report. I also really like that it underscores the importance of what we're doing, here in the U.S. in achieving this dominance in the nuclear energy sector. Sometimes those things get disconnected, and people, forget just how important it is that we have the world's, most efficient nuclear fleet, the largest nuclear fleet, and one that, we've got an operating system here in the U.S. that other countries want to emulate, and so. Underscoring the importance of continuing to do what we're doing there, getting the most we can out of our existing nuclear plants, I think is really important. And of course, it's also really important to underscore the importance of new build here at home. And there's a lot of countries out there that want to invest in U.S. technology, but they don't necessarily want to be the first ones to bring it online. And so there's a real emphasis in the report on getting to new build in the U.S., whether that's through some commercial projects, things like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, I think also are very important. Of course, the administration's now moving forward with efforts to try to build or help along the construction of quite a number of micro and other advanced reactors. So that's really going to help set the stage for us competing successfully in global markets, and it's important that those things be continued. Really want to underscore and emphasize what Todd said about the importance of early mover support. There really is a tremendous amount of interest in new nuclear construction in the U.S. I'm sure the reasons are very familiar to all of you, but even before we saw this growth in AI and data center electricity demand, there was already quite a bit of interest in new nuclear construction in the U.S., but these projections for tremendous growth in electric demand, even if they aren't all, we're not going to see all of those demands actually realized. It really underscores the fact that we're in an and environment now, right? It's not this or that, it's going to be this and that. And nuclear energy has a tremendously important role to play, certainly as a clean energy resource, but the reliability and resilience of nuclear power is increasingly being valued. And so it's going to be important that we have something like early mover support, not for eternity, but to help the first handful of projects of different designs to get into the construction phase. I think once we've gotten the first few projects under our belt, then you're going to see quite a bit of momentum pick up. To that end, it's also going to be important that implementation of the incentives that exist for new nuclear is done well. Things like foreign entities of concern provisions, as Treasury implements those, that those are implemented in a way that enables new nuclear to go forward. And to that end, we need to express our appreciation for Congress maintaining the strong incentives for both existing nuclear and new nuclears, and with the reconciliation bill process, as well as retaining the important capabilities of the Loan Programs Office. Again, pointing back to something that Todd mentioned, I think that's extremely important. But so something like the Senator Risch's ARC Act can really serve as that accelerant. I mean, that's the first letter in ARC is accelerating reliable capacity, and getting some sort of an accelerant in place, I think, can really unleash this wave of new build. Also important is going to be increasing regulatory efficiency, and that's something that's also pointed to in the report. And we at NEI have submitted a fairly robust set of recommendations to the NRC that we hope that they'll adopt as ways of improving regulatory efficiency and modernizing the regulatory processes while still maintaining public confidence in the strength of our regulator. I also think there's a real opportunity for growing international cooperation on the regulatory front, right? And we've got some novel reactor technologies that are going through or will soon be going through the NRC process. And working in partnership with regulators from other countries can really help expedite the availability or the ability of those companies and those technologies to compete in other markets. So you look at what's happened between the U.S., Canada, and Poland, for example, with the GE SMR design. That sort of partnership with other reactor technologies, I think, can really help our exporters over the long term. And so I'd love to see more of that sort of international cooperation take place. And we talk about that a little bit in the report. And then finally, and again, hitting some of the things that Todd mentioned, we really do need to bolster that export toolkit. And there's some great recommendations in the report, regarding things like 123 agreements. Intergovernmental agreements have been a very important tool over the last several years in bolstering bilateral cooperation, and that's the sort of thing we need to see more of. Maximizing the competitiveness of the offerings that can be made from the Export-Import Bank. Todd mentioned that, things like, carving out nuclear transactions from the default rate cap or adding nuclear to the China and Transformational Exports Program. There are specific things like that I think, Todd, you may have been alluding to, can really help make EXIM more powerful. Same thing goes with TDA and expanding their capacities. They really punch above their weight in terms of if you just look at the amount of money they're provided and the impact that they can have on U.S. competitiveness. And so we'd love to see that bolstered. And same thing with the FIRST program in the State Department's another thing that can really deliver benefits far beyond the amount of money that's involved. So a lot of opportunities to bolster the export toolkit that are highlighted in this report. And that I think are very much worth taking up. And then finally, I'd be remiss, I would expect Brad's going to talk a little about the fuel cycle and maybe the waste issue. And I'd hate to pass up an opportunity to call out, we've got Chuck McCutcheon from Axios here, and anybody who's interested in the waste issue, you got to read his book, all right, Nuclear Reactions, about the siting of the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico. Anybody who wants the sense of what collaboration-based or consent-based siting might look like, it's a great book. So I wanted to give you a shout out because it's still my favorite nuclear waste book ever.
Just add that you were not paid to say that.
I was not paid to say that. I get no royalties, as far as I know. But with that, let me pass it along to Brad.
He said that so I had something to read while I'm at the beach this weekend. Hopefully there's an audio version that I can have while I'm chasing little kids around. So again, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be part of this group. I think I've been with you since the very beginning, along with a couple other colleagues.
First call I made, I think.
Yeah. It's a really great time. There's never been a time like this in nuclear in my career, probably in my lifetime, honestly. There's so much bipartisan support. There's so much that's been done over the last number of years. There's so much more that needs to be done. I had a conversation with somebody over the winter, right around Christmas, and something that he said at the end of the conversation really stuck with me, and I think it sums up the opportunity very well. He said, "You sound like you're trying really hard to be optimistic, but I can sense the pessimism." And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, "Well, that's interesting because now is a great time. The next, at the time, 4 years now, a little over 3 years left. If we get this right, we will reestablish U.S. leadership and dominance in nuclear energy. It's a tremendous opportunity, but the devil's in the details. We have to get it right. If we don't get it right, this might be our last shot." So, like I said, a lot has been done over the last number of years. I'm proud to have been part of the team working in Congress to get a lot of the legislation passed. And even before that, working with John at the Department of Energy, providing the technical support to Congress for some of the earliest bills with NECA, NEMA, et cetera. But now we have to execute. We have to implement the policy. We have to figure out the additional policy opportunities, but we don't have 12 more bites at the apple. We probably have one or two. So the next things that Congress is going to do, we have to get right. It has to be the right actions. They will eventually get fatigue about coming back to the trough asking for more. And it needs to be a coordinated effort. You know, the 4 executive orders are super exciting. They direct the administration and the executive branch to do a ton of work. It's what I'm spending all day and all night thinking about, how we implement and how we execute that work. But we need Congress, right? One of the first recommendations is we need robust funding to execute these projects. Whether it's continuing the loan program funding and expanding that to support the 10 new builds that we see in the coming years, or finishing the advanced reactor demonstration projects and the new Gen 3 Plus projects, which I think still are pending award. We still need domestic fuel availability, right? I mean, that's one of the frustrations is we've coming in the opportunity, we have the opportunity to move faster, remove the barriers, remove the regulatory barriers, the permitting barriers, the bureaucratic barriers, but in some instances, we might be creating new ones that actually slow things down. It's August and we still don't have HALU awards. It's time to get moving forward on those. We made some new HALU downblending awards to get some of the fuel going early to the advanced reactor developers, but we need the commercial industry. We need a robust workforce. We're talking about having the National Energy Dominance Council do all of these things. They are still working on finding someone to be the lead nuclear person. We don't have a lead nuclear person in that office. OSTP is trying to find somebody. We need a team of people at the White House. We need a robust team of experts at DOE. We need a robust team of experts at the NRC. I'm seeing firsthand these agencies are getting tasked to do a lot more and be a lot more aggressive and creative in their thinking, and they're doing it with fewer staff. We need to be building up the capabilities, building up the workforce, have a coordinated and integrated effort across all of the agencies, working closely with Congress. And in doing that, I think we really have a great opportunity. I'm helping DOE with their fuel cycle strategy and figuring out the waste management strategy, so I can't wait to read the book this weekend. It's a tremendous opportunity, and part of the executive order was, hey, let's utilize our excess surpluses of plutonium, in addition to utilizing excess uranium that the department has that was already authorized and directed and funded through the Nuclear Fuel Security Act as part of the 2024 NDAA. A couple years ago, we would have never thought about using plutonium in reactors. Now it might be a necessity. If the world is going to triple nuclear production, if the U.S. is going to quadruple nuclear production by 2050, fuel availability is quickly becoming the key issue. Plus the broader supply chain. We also need to be able to build the reactors and build the centrifuges to do the enrichment. We need additional conversion facilities to turn it into the right form for enrichment. But the supply chain writ large is going to become the biggest issue, and especially with fuel availability. To talk about the bipartisan support for nuclear, one of the last things that I was able to help get done while I was in Congress is pass the Russian uranium ban. Every single member of Congress voted in favor of that. I don't think you could get every member of Congress to vote in favor of a resolution that says puppies are cute. Right, I have a new puppy. She bites my ankles all the time. Sometimes she's not cute. But every single member of Congress got on board with that. The other bills were hugely bipartisan. Now we need to execute. We need to get things done. We need to look creatively beyond plutonium maybe being required for a fuel. We need to recycle spent nuclear fuel. Not only will it help address the waste issue, we will still always need a repository, but it'll help address mitigate the liability and reduce the burden on the future repository or repositories. But we need that material for fuel. We also need it for isotopes. One of the important recommendations in here that I know is something that's continues to be a policy issue that we need to address. Not only are we trying to eliminate reliance on Russia for uranium, half of our medical and industrial isotopes come from Russia. We don't want to ban that because we don't want to tell anybody they can't get their cancer treatment. So we made a strong effort to not impact isotope production. But some of the policies that we're looking at, tariffs, for example, if not implemented in a smart and intentional way, could inadvertently impact things like medical isotope production, right? A lot of what we get now, if it's not from Russia, is coming from Canada. So, and I know attention is being paid to that. I've worked with folks in DOE, for example, that are intentionally focusing on things like that, but we need to be very specific in what we do. But the world has changed. We need power. AI, the energy demand, the rest of the world needing, reliable power just to drive their economy is becoming super important. Fuel availability and energy security are the new national security interest and focus in light of Russia and China. Non-proliferation is something we continue to worry about, but I'd argue that most of the world is more worried about keeping the lights on right now, and they'll use whatever fuel they can get, and we might need to use every fuel we can get, potentially even thorium beyond plutonium and recycled uranium. So that's where I'm really excited about the opportunities. It's a paradigm shift in how we think about nuclear, not only for keeping the lights on, but all of the other applications. But the devil's in the details. If we do it right, it'll be a really great opportunity, and we'll look back in a few years and say, wow, we really did something big.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Jared, do we have a microphone for the room?
We were gonna use yours.
Oh, no, in the back there, in the back. So it's 10:07. Maybe just while we're getting started, we have a question right here then? Okay. I was going to start us off, but since we've got a lot of people here, why don't we just go straight to the crowd? We can just, I think we're getting a microphone for you. It's coming around, so just bear with me. Yeah. So we need the microphone so the people on the live stream can hear. Please identify yourself as you ask your question.
Good morning. I'm Pete Bear with Politico's E&E News, and I wanted to turn to recommendation 4 and ask about the context of that. As you've mentioned, the president has directed DOE to create a new pathway for establishing the safety and affordability of reactors. They've picked 10 developers to try to get pilots up and running by July 4th, 2026, which is a really ambitious timetable. And the question is, for the panel, for Bradley Williams and John Kotek, how does the new DOE pathway for establishing reactor safety intersect with the NRC's statutory responsibility for licensing commercial reactors? Should NRC just rubber stamp decisions about new reactor safety, as we've been told, the NRC staff has been told? What is the relationship between the establishment of a DOE safety approval and what the NRC is supposed to do statutorily? And
So I'll go ahead and start, and the simple answer to your question is no, they should not be rubber stamping. And I don't believe that's the intent. So DOE has always had the authority to authorize certain nuclear facilities and has done that for decades and continues to do that to this day. This actually, most of the discussion is between DOE and NRC, but it also includes DOD, right? They have their own authority as well to license or authorize, to use the proper terminology, their facilities. I actually see it as a tremendous opportunity. And again, this is one of the areas where the key is how you execute. DOE has the authority to move fast with approving innovative research development type facilities, first of a kind type facilities, for various purposes at the across the National Lab Complex. They're very good at doing that. It's a very similar process to what NRC does, but is different, and as I understand it, is a little more collaborative and deliberate, and brings folks together to discuss as they're moving forward. So the way I think we should look at it is DOE can help NRC move forward with how they are taking their new innovative risk-informed, performance-based approach that's required by NEMA and is part of the Part 53. But they need to be working together. To me, this is a perfect opportunity to demonstrate regulatory harmonization, which has been talked about for years and years on an international standpoint, whether it's other countries accepting and rubber stamping NRC's approval or them having to go through their own processes. This is just different agencies in the U.S. So NRC can learn from what DOE is doing, DOE can learn from what NRC is doing, and hopefully it's a collaborative process that ultimately leads to faster and more efficient and reasonable licensing.
Yeah, Brad put that really well. Is there not much to add? Just to maybe underscore a little bit from our DOE experiences, a lot of folks don't realize that DOE has licensed the design, construction, operation of reactors for a long time. When I was DOE Idaho, I had a cadre, probably about a dozen of facility representatives who were akin to the site reps that you see in the NRC. So there is a lot of commonality, and I think Brad made an excellent point. One of the real benefits of this could be that if the NRC and DOE are working together properly on this, that when you go through that DOE process, if you then want to go through an NRC process, that you're not having to reinvent the wheel along the way. So that's something we're certainly going to be looking for.
Yeah, if I could just add, I don't think this is an either-or situation. And I think it's important that the 10 companies that have already been selected for the pilot project program understand that while they may be able to get a first reactor up and running and critical within the next year, that necessarily does not give them an NRC license. And I think they understand that. And I think the smart ones will move forward with that process at the NRC in conjunction with whatever they're doing with DOE or DOD. I've talked to at least 3 of our member companies at USNIC that have been approved for the pilot project program already, and they think that they can actually get there by July 4th of next year. Some of them might not, but I think the president's ambition to get 3 of those reactors critical are doable. That puts at least those 3 companies that are able to get there, if possible, in a position where they could actually commercialize their product. And to do that, they are going to have to go through the NRC, and I think they understand that, and will continue to move forward in a sort of dual track with either the DOE, the DOD, and the NRC at the same time.
Other questions? I guess we go right here with Evan.
Hi, good morning. I'm Evan Halper with the Washington Post. For Mr. Williams, in terms of, you said a couple of years ago we wouldn't have even been talking about using plutonium, and we're also talking about recycling again. There are reasons we weren't talking about doing that, right? I mean, we went through the MOX program, and the Trump administration pulled the plug as the price tag rose to like $40 to $50 billion. The recycling, again, there's been talk about this, but the spent fuel's been sitting around, and just we've looked at other countries' experiences, and they haven't really been able to make it work in an economic way. Has the technology really changed that much that this something that wasn't feasible before and wasn't economic suddenly is?
Yes, I mean, is the simple answer. The technology is advancing, but so are the surrounding dynamics, right? So there's a number of reasons that it may be beneficial to recycle, and we're working on this analysis and developing a strategy. And if we're going to recycle, we may not be there right now in terms of economics, and in terms of fuel price and technologies to go fully commercial, but now is when we need to start thinking about it, because if we are going to have 3 or 4 times the nuclear capacity domestically or around the world by the mid-century, we need to be moving forward with those processes now. The technologies certainly are advancing. as I've been working through this process, I've met a lot of innovative technology developers. There's about a dozen, if not more, companies working on innovative approaches to nuclear fuel recycling, whether it's to provide fuel for existing light water reactors, which is the MOX program that you referenced, that's based on existing technology that was actually developed in the United States but implemented commercially in France. There are new approaches, but it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? So you mentioned some of the spent fuel that we have sitting around that's been, stored for many, many years. That may not be the most attractive or economic fuel to recycle. But if you're looking at HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, higher enriched uranium for advanced reactors, the economics change, right? It costs, that's currently not commercially available. So the only HALEU that's being made available is actually being made from recycling DOE spent fuel, is how we're getting the first tranches of HALEU out. But then other advanced reactor fuels are of different forms, provide different opportunities. Advances in drilling, right? Fracking changed the game. Horizontal drilling was not a thing when Yucca Mountain was decided on as the repository. Deep boreholes might help provide answers. Triso fuel is a different fuel that actually can be ideal for using recycled fuel, but also is an ideal waste form. So the technology has come a long way. I think the economics, again, there's currently a global gap in uranium availability just for the current fleet. If we triple globally, quadruple domestically, that gap is going to be bigger. So again, economics might change. And the national security narrative is also changing, in terms of the non-proliferation concerns, or maybe those are going away and fuel availability is becoming more.
I don't think you made this point, correct me if I missed it, but certainly there's the MOX, experience that we talked about. When I think about the use of plutonium by some of these advanced reactor companies, that's more akin to like the EBR-2 experience out in Idaho, where they used uranium, plutonium, zirconium fuel, as well as most of what they did was uranium, zirconium, but that was a highly enriched, 60-something% enriched uranium, and the plutonium can take the place of that. So it's not like these companies would be starting from scratch. There's actually quite an experience set and database of fuel irradiation, data that's available to back up, like an Oklo, for example, if they might want to go down that road. So I just want to make sure.
And just echoing that, just one more quick point. Using plutonium, that may or may not be, a broadly used fuel of the future, but, I think an initial step that makes sense is we have to dispose of this plutonium that the DOE has one way or another. Might as well get useful electricity out of it and energy out of it and demonstrate these advanced technologies. As I mentioned, we're still working to get commercial fuel enrichment up for HALEU. Plutonium might become the bridge, help lengthen the bridge of using DOE material to get that commercial uranium. So it might be a short-lived opportunity, but potentially could also be something we need to look at more.
I just want to make one point with regard to the reprocessing, recycling issue. From a competitive perspective, from a commercial perspective, we've got countries like Russia, they're doing take-back programs. In order for us to be competitive internationally with China, Russia, others, we need to figure out a way to close the fuel cycle and really offer those same types of things to customers that want to utilize U.S. technology.
That's a very important final point. First hand I saw was back there. Second one, after that we could. I'm sorry. Yeah, back there. And I'm sorry, we'll go to you third. And then that probably is all we'll have time for is those three, but we'll see how it goes.
Hi, Jay Rick Hayes, research engineer here in DC. I'm just curious in terms of trying to scale the efforts, how do you build the undergraduate pipeline, to meet these demands, differently than previous decades? So what incentive would you give a 7th, 8th grader in terms of why this industry, with all the competing STEM occupations that are, demanding right now, what would be that spark you could give a 7th, 8th grader right now?
First of all, what a great question, right? And it's something that the industry has been focused on. I want to give credit to our friends at the American Nuclear Society. They put some real effort with some support from DOE into developing some modern curricula to try to get more of this education into the schools. As an industry, one of the things we're trying to do is raise awareness of the value of a career in nuclear. And it's super important to have those trained engineers, for example, but a lot of the jobs in nuclear don't require that level. So, whether it's people working as instrumentation and control techs, or people working on the security side, people working in the construction of these facilities, there's jobs for people with a broad range of educational backgrounds. We're trying to highlight that. We've developed something called nuclearworks.org, where people can go and understand what it is to have a career in nuclear. There's an affiliated organization called Nuclear Matters that we work with that's also out there trying to raise awareness at that level. And then there's quite a bit that goes on through the national labs, through teacher workshops and other resources to try to get teachers to then bring that awareness of careers in nuclear. So there's a broad range of things that are being done now. The other thing that's emerged, almost separate and apart really from the industry, is the number of people who are in the influencer category, who are reaching younger people regarding the value of a career in nuclear. So, the isotope is probably the best known one, but there's nuclear hazelnut, and there's a whole bunch of other younger folks out there who are communicating with people in that age group, raising awareness about the value of nuclear and the benefits of nuclear careers. And then when people get interested and they dig into it, then they start to realize, hey, wait, I'm concerned about climate. Here's a way to bring zero carbon generation to the grid. I want to be able to support myself. Nuclear jobs pay much better than other jobs in most areas, right? So once people get once people get drawn in, the more they learn about it, the more they tend to get excited. And so I hear fairly regularly from people who are, in that, maybe a little bit older than that, but people who are starting their career journeys who want to learn how they get involved in nuclear, because what they learn about it just through those other sources really excites them.
So John stole my thunder a little bit, but I'll build on that. Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing a lot of it. I mean, the younger generation, there's people do a lot of surveys in nuclear space in terms of favorability. The younger generation is much more favorable than the older generations, and it's because nuclear checks all the boxes for things they care about. The clean energy, reliable energy jobs. But again, I'm going to build on the utilizing the way young people communicate, right? And I'm now old enough that I'm losing touch with this, but I'll give an example. So the Women in Nuclear Conference that just happened last month, if I remember, in Louisiana, they had a keynote from another influencer, but she's a broader STEM influencer. I think this generation's Bill Nye. I'd say Emily Calandrelli, the space gal. This one kind of hits home because I have a 7-year-old daughter that, when we were home during COVID, she found Emily's Wonder Lab on Netflix, a really awesome show teaching science through, young, easy to do experiments for young people. She's written a couple of books. We actually got to meet her in DC a couple years ago at a book signing. My daughter's obsessed with her. If we could get her to, she now has a show on YouTube, we get her to do some shows on nuclear, you've automatically sucked those folks in. I'm actually hoping maybe we can figure out how to get her at the DCANS this winter and get my daughter's Girl Scout troop. But I think that's the kind of way that we can get the younger generation involved, see people that they look up to that are saying this, and really get them excited about it.
Yeah, all great points. I won't touch on any of those. The one thing I will say is that hasn't been said is that if you look around sort of our post-secondary institutions here in the United States, you're starting to see real growth in new nuclear engineering programs being offered. Schools that have had them in the past and have shut them down are starting to bring them back. And I think, that's because there's a demand drive there, right? From students that are saying, hey, we want to learn about nuclear engineering. And so to your question, I think we're already seeing it. Obviously, I think we're doing a great job. I will follow up on your one point with respect to ANS. They're doing a great job in the K through 12 space. But there's a lot of work and a lot of effort that's gone into this over the last several years, and I think we're starting to see the fruits of that labor.
Okay, very good. Back table, then here, then here.
Hi, Jim Howe from UCAN Power. First, terrific report. Appreciate your work on it. Agree with pretty much everything you've said. You brought up a couple of times funding and let's get things done. When you look at tripling or quadrupling nuclear capacity in the U.S., it's a lot of money. Okay, it's about 10 billion a gigawatt, so you're talking times 300 is low single-digit trillions. The government, even if it put 5 or 10 billion a year, that would maybe be 10% of that. So it's all going to come from the private sector. The EOs make it pretty clear that this administration expects the private sector to step up and be the funder. So what can the government do to help catalyze this sort of private sector investment that's probably going to have to be 100 billion or so a year for the next 25 years to really get this done?
So I'm going to go ahead and start with that because it's actually a point I wanted to make earlier. The government can be a partner and a customer. So in addition, we hear a lot about the risk insurance. The government can also mitigate risk by being first movers. There's been a lot of attention on that for years and years and years. The Department of Defense is doing that, right? One of the executive orders specifically targeted that. DoD has the authority to enter into long-term 40-year power purchase agreements to spread those costs over and minimize the risk. DOE and other agencies do not have that long-term authority. Unfortunately, that's one of the things that we couldn't get across the finish line while I was on the Hill. Hopefully, folks that are up there now will get it done. But with the data center demands, for just storing data, government has a lot of data, right? The AI demand, winning the AI race, the government has a lot of need for AI. Plus the defense and other missions that need reliable, resilient, clean energy to power government facilities. The government could partner with some of the private entities and have a stake in the projects, and I think that would go a long way in helping to minimize the risk.
Yeah, Jim, to your question, I think the two things I talked about very early on, risk insurance for one, LPO being dedicated, they've got a lot of money that they've already been allocated that's sitting there just sort of waiting to be put to use, in tens of billions of dollars. So there's a good chunk already there to get the ball rolling. I agree with Brad. The government could absolutely be not just a customer, but a huge, huge customer for this industry. And so those three things, I think if we can get all three of those things up and running, we'll be in real good shape. John?
Okay. If we could move the microphone over here, and then we'll give you the last question. That's all right.
Hello, my name is Oren Serday. I work as a deputy nuclear counselor in the French embassy. I thank you for your intervention and this report, and I would like to ask you a question about something you briefly mentioned in the report, is the international cooperation between US and partners in allied states. So, namely, I think of my country, France, but also South Korea. As you know, I think that most of nuclear technology are mastered by the US, but on the scientific basis, and we also have to think about industrial deployment or supply chain for both reactors and also fuel cycle like enrichment and reprocessing facilities. So I wanted to ask you how you envision these potential partnerships between US and allied countries in order to achieve the nuclear renaissance in the US but also abroad, and to fight against Chinese and Russian influence on the sector.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with that one. Give my best to Sunil Felix, by the way. That's a great question, and it's something that we actually touched on in the report. Being able to work with our friends and allies across the globe, on the supply chain is incredibly important. I had the opportunity to sit down with the CEO of KHNP yesterday. I'm going to Seoul this weekend and we'll be there next week to meet with almost a dozen different companies that are interested in working with U.S. reactor developers or potentially building plants here in the U.S. to manufacture their products here and to build up the U.S. domestic supply chain. I get it, whether it's France, and I had the opportunity to tour Le Hague and see that reprocessing facility. There are a number of opportunities with countries around the world for us to do exactly that. And so that's something that I'm obviously interested in. It's something that I focused on a lot while I was in the first Trump administration, and certainly in the role that I'm in now. I'm very hopeful to figure out how we can work together with countries that want to be able to compete internationally against the Chinese and the Russians. And if we can do that in partnership, all the better.
Okay, terrific. We're coming up. It is 10:30, which is our announced closing time, but let's take a final question. We're happy to do that. We have the room till 11, so it's not a hard stop. Happy to.
Thank you. Jessica Sunger with Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. Kind of adjacent to that question, and probably for you, Todd. My understanding is that if KHNP is going to successfully invest in the U.S., that this joint venture deal with Westinghouse is very important. It also sounds like for the Korean government, some concessions on nuclear cooperation, enrichment, reprocessing, potential nuclear submarines are all part of the negotiating chips. From that perspective, what can really be done on the policy front? And now it sounds like Westinghouse and KHNP are in a commercial aspect of their negotiations. So what concessions are there, if any, that the U.S. or Westinghouse have to give, considering that Lee especially doesn't view the settlement agreement as part of his doing? It's his predecessor's mistake. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I don't want to get ahead of my skis and negotiate on behalf of Westinghouse. So I will avoid that part of your question. But look, KHNP in particular has done a number of deals with member organizations of USNIC at this point. Recently announced a deal with Amazon. Just signed a couple of days ago a new deal with Centrus. They're working with Oklo, they're working with Westinghouse, they're working with TerraPower. So there are a number of opportunities, even outside of whatever they're trying to negotiate with Westinghouse, for them to get involved in the U.S. market. And as I said in my last answer, it takes a village to go back even a few more administrations. But it really is going to take a village to put us in a position to be able to compete with the Chinese and the Russians. So whatever we need to do to make that happen, I'm happy to see those types of relationships blossom. I will let the parties to those negotiations work those items out themselves, but certainly important that they do that.
I'll add one piece, not related to Westinghouse, but you mentioned some of the fuel cycle aspects. I think, again, it gets to what the world looks like today and what the non-proliferation and national security objectives are. We have to realize that other countries, for the most part, aren't obsessed with making a bomb, right? That's not why they're pursuing enrichment or reprocessing technology. It's so they can turn the lights on, so they aren't reliant on Russia and China and adversaries for their fuel supply. A lot of countries don't have natural resources. Some countries don't have the geography to deploy a lot of renewables. They have to, figure out the fuel issue, and that's predominantly the what they're focused on. It's also human nature. People don't want to be told what they can and can't do. So by us having continuing the gold standard in our 1, 2, 3 agreements of no reprocessing, no enrichment, it may actually be hurting our national security and non-proliferation objectives because we're sending them into the arms of Russia and China. And I think we need to rethink about that approach.
One last. I said that would be it, but I'm always a sucker.
I don't want to break the rules.
No, I'm always a sucker for one last question.
It's Mike Woosley from Senator Coon's office. Sorry to step out for a call for 15 minutes. So hopefully, has anyone talked about the DOE program and the criticality and the question? I just want to get a reaction about that from the panel, because to me that's like the most misunderstood part of the executive orders. So I want to say how I see this program. It's a fail-fast program that should work for the 11 companies if they want to have trial and error and maybe possibly make some mistakes. Like, that's the way SpaceX works. They had an explosion in June. And I think people need to realize that if you're going to invite companies onto DO Labs to do this work, there might be some issues. And, that's happened at Idaho before. There have even been deaths there. And to me, like, that program shouldn't be viewed with a lens to optimize public health and safety by the public or the administration, and it shouldn't be viewed by a lens of the companies as something just to do fast to please the administration. If it's part of your program and it's part of your needs, you should lean in. That's what Kairos is doing at Oak Ridge. So I just want to get the panel's reaction on that lens on it, because I just don't see it getting communicated that way in the public eye.
I'll kick off. To your point about Kairos, look, they've been using an iterative process for quite a while with their reactor, and I think you might be right. I mean, certainly a number of those companies. Although you mentioned there's 11, there's actually 10. Oklo got 2 of those projects. Yeah, 11 projects, 10 companies. But there may be a number of those companies that are looking at working with DOE in this manner, just that way. Making this iterative for their technologies. Look, if they can build one reactor for the very first time and it works and it goes critical and everything is A-okay, then great. But to your point, they may need some trial and error to get it right. And so, those are the companies that may not hit that July 4th, 2026 deadline. But I think DOE recognizes that not everybody's going to do that, and they're willing to work with all of those companies to move forward to show that they can get critical at some point down the road.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, we shouldn't expect all 11 projects to be fully successful, connected to the grid, generating electricity, right? I think that we have to manage our expectations. Hopefully they're all successful, but I think realistically some of them will meet the date. Some of them might take another year, 6 months, or some of them may just not end up successful, and that's okay, right? As technical people, scientists, I studied physics. Getting a bad result is still a useful result, right? It tells you which path not to continue down. But I think we need to manage expectations in terms of what this is and what criticality is in the near term. But it's a great opportunity. You mentioned doing it at INL, and I'm not sure if all of the projects will be there, but that's why we have national labs across the country, mostly in the middle of nowhere. Right, INL was originally the reactor test station. We've demonstrated over 50 reactors since the early days out in the desert where nobody's around. So you can try things, and if they don't work, that's okay. But I think that's how we're going to get innovative and how we're going to move the needle.
Leave it there? Okay, very good. Thank you all so much for coming, and many thanks to our panelists.